Okay, I think we'll begin now. I'm Vince Staley, Executive Director of Media Impact Funders, and welcome everybody to Pathbreaking Approaches to Reach New Audiences. It's our webinar it's our current offering in a series of webinars that we're doing on communicating science and the science of communications, supported with grant support from the Rita Allen Foundation. And we've got a really interesting discussion today, a very lively array of different perspectives. And in addition to picking up on the very particular theme of sort of new approaches and new platforms, which Adnaan Wasey is going to address, we're also going to be hearing about upcoming programs at Wgbh, including next week's Smash, and John Bredar is going to tell us all about that, as well as in October, the Innovation Idea Lab that Linda Harrar is going to speak about. We're always looking for venues where innovative ideas, percolate up. And so we've been going for a number of years to programs like Pop Tech, which is itself going to be a really exciting program this year at the end of October. As well, one of the great events of the season for understanding or hearing the latest and new and interesting work on science is at the Explorers Festival in June. And so we're very fortunate for a variety of reasons to have Kaitlin Yarnall, Senior Vice President at National Geographic Society, to be with us to lead and moderate this discussion today, not least of all because she's also the newest board member at Media Impact Funders. So thank you and welcome, Kaitlin, and take it away.
Thanks, Vince, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And I'm excited to really start this conversation with these panelists. I'll make my remarks and my time brief, but try to be the connective tissue, the fascia between us all, to make sure this is an impactful conversation, and also to take questions from anyone who's tuning in. Remember to send them to us, and we will surface them throughout the conversation and when it makes sense. Really, I'm excited about this conversation because it is really diving into this idea of how do we make sure that the content that we fund or we create, we produce, that we're interested in gets to the right audiences. And how do we find new audiences? And how do we also find new story ideas? So we have with us a group that can really uniquely talk about two events, which Vince mentioned, Smash and then Innovation Ideas Lab, that connect and really make these important connections between sources, ideas, scientists, funders, and then the public. So without further ado, I think we should start. I want to first introduce someone who used to be my colleague, but I'm very excited that now I get to work with him again, even if it's only through a webinar. So John Bredar is Vice President for National Programs at Wgbh, based in Boston, and he oversees the 5 major national series produced there: Frontline, American Experience, Nova, Antique Roadshow, and Masterpiece. He also runs Studio 6, which is a production group. So John's busy, but because he wasn't busy enough, he also now is running Smash, which was founded in 2014 in partnership with the Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival. And it's a biannual gathering of scientists and science media makers focused on science literacy and the best new content in science programming. And we're all lucky to get a sneak preview because it is next week in Boston. So joining John in conversation is Adnaan Wasey, and Adnaan is an Emmy Award-winning producer and the Rita Allen Fellow for Science Communications, which is embedded at WGBH. And I'm really personally excited to hear about this model of embedding someone who's doing research within a media context. And previously, he was at the New York Times and the PBS docuseries POV, where he was the digital executive producer and also an editor of local, national, and international news. So that's enough from me. I want to hand this over to John. And John, take it away. Talk to us about reaching new audiences and give us a tease into Smash.
Okay. Thank you, Kaitlin, and welcome to everybody. It's great to be able to talk to you, especially in this kind of interesting way. So Smash, I'll talk briefly about Smash and just give you a quick primer. Smash is at least three things. It's a science summit and science film festival and awards program. It is a partnership, as Kaitlin referenced, with Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival. And SMASH is also an acronym which stands for Science Media Awards and Summit in the Hub, which most of you know Boston is the hub of the universe and has been since the late 19th century, according to people smarter than I am. Why do we do SMASH? So we created SMASH along with our partners at Jackson to address what we felt was a really important gap in the media space with regard to science, and our focus is primarily on science literacy. Initially when we were able to kind of get support from Rita Allen Foundation, we made the case that there was a great lack of science knowledge in the United States. I was most recently looking at something from the National Science Board, a survey, an adult survey of science knowledge. It's not that bad. It's remained fairly constant for the last 2 decades. But what's interesting about that is the environment around us has changed dramatically in those 20, 30 years. And so now issues of science and society have become far more important for us to be conscious of. Issues of climate, issues of infrastructure, things around addiction, for example. So the relevance for something like SMASH has only grown. So what SMASH does in a bid to kind of address this is bring together about 230 delegates who are made up of early to mid-career and beyond working scientists and science media makers from around the world. So the idea is to kind of get them all together and have them rub shoulders, have them kind of participate in informal social interactions in between the various panels. Add to this, we have about 13 SMASH fellows. These are supported by the Rita Allen Foundation grant as well as an NSF grant. This is a bid to kind of expand the choir. We actively seek people from historically underrepresented groups, both scientists and science media makers. They tend to be on the younger side, which is intentional. It's a pretty hot ticket. In the last couple of years that we've done this, we've had upwards of 300 applications for 10 to 13 positions. And we're, again, this year able to bring people from around the world and the US. So those fellows are there. They are an integral part of this combination of people. Our festival, the summit is single track. We like that because there's just one conversation going on. And I'll pop up a slide here in a second and show you just real quickly the range of things. But over the course of 3 days, we have about 14 different sessions. We have 2 keynotes. They are keynote conversations. SMASH is characterized by a lot of Q&A and a lot of interactivity. Here's I'll just pop up our slide here. This just gives you a rough idea of what's on offer. We have a wide variety of topics. Opening keynote from Mary Lou Jepson, who's trained as a physical she's an optical physicist and has pioneered in the area of wearable diagnostics. And she's fascinating, going to tell us a little bit about how to build a massive data set and to do so through individual devices like a Fitbit, for example. I won't go through each one, but this year I would highlight the fact that we have I would say a sub-theme of artificial intelligence. So in addition to Mary Lou's keynote at the top, which dovetails with AI, We have a dedicated session on AI and how disruptive that is actually going to be in our world, how disruptive it already is. And our closing keynote comes from Deb Roy, who some of you may know from, he's as the director of the Laboratory of Social Machines at MIT. He's the guy behind the publication last spring in Science, an article talking about why fake news embeds more deeply and travels quicker than real news. So that gives you just kind of a rough idea. You see, we have a wide range of different topics. And one of those I would say that's relevant here is that we're really focusing intently on new platforms and how to reach new audiences, which is not a bad transition to what Adnaan will talk about.
Just trying to unmute myself. Okay, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So yes, I'm the Reed Allen Fellow for Science Communication embedded at Wgbh in Boston, and I'm the only one, the first, maybe of more. We'll call it the inaugural Reed Allen Fellowship. And I'm a producer. So a lot of my work has been about diversity in media and using media to educate, and that's no different here. So on this fellowship, I have two jobs. I'm researching science media and I'm producing science media with the aim of improving science literacy. And it's for education, so literacy. But we know that literacy is not an end, it's a means to an end. And I also see my work as about reaching new audiences. So you can put on a different hat and consider this to be an audience development project, which I also do. So if you're thinking about your audience, if you're a journalist or a documentary filmmaker, well, you have to ask that question of yourself. Who is the audience? And there's a lot of ways to break that down. You might break it down by the likelihood of that person in the audience to act. And so if you can put those into three groups, you could say maybe the easiest one, the default, could be the group that's already sold. You can just point them towards your thing, and if they're doing good already in quotes and you give them some more tools, they might be able to, whatever your framework is, climb the ladder of engagement one more rung. And that's good. That's probably easy. Another approach would be a second group, which is to go to the fence sitters. It's also completely valid to go to the fence sitters. Just give them a little nudge, push them over to the good side. And then there's a third very difficult category, which is obviously what I'm tackling, which is you go to the people who haven't thought about doing that thing or who are actively fighting against it or who don't feel like they're part of the conversation. And this is especially important when that group is big or has big influence. And for what I'm doing, it is. So in the context of science, you might think of a group like the ideologically conservative group. There are more conservatives and liberals in the United States, irrespective of how they vote. Or it could be people without college degrees, women are underserved, people of color. You get where I'm going with this. There are diverse audiences. And I'm lumping them together to say that I can call this group broad or a non-elite audience. And so that's the opposite of the liberal, coastal, white, male, highly educated, so on and so on. And this group, again, generally speaking, is underserved, underinformed, and sometimes misinformed. So there's an imperative to reach this group well. So, and I should say, I'm talking about science, but I think this work could help us reach any outside group when it comes to any complex subject. So whether it's science or economics or another social issue, so I would just suggest to keep that at the back of your mind if science isn't your thing. So for my research, I've been talking to a number of people. I've been talking with TV producers. Of course, I'm embedded at WGBH. I've been talking with YouTubers, academics, journalists, people who intersect with advertising, because really what we're talking about here is persuasion. And I've been talking to conservatives and people of color and so on, all those people that I mentioned. And they're all pointing me towards entertainment as a vehicle. Social science is actually pointing me there also, but these two things have not been wed yet. So this is a new intersection in terms of research. And so that's why I think it's potentially really interesting. So from the public's perspective, they don't think there's science around them once school ends. And what that means in practice is for this group, which is most people, science doesn't happen in a laboratory or in an office. It happens in media. Television primarily, film, social media, those are blurring together a little more, but television has always been primary. that's where you're getting your messages from. So think about this. 81% of Americans watch science as entertainment. The number one show last year, scripted show last year, was The Big Bang Theory, which is a sciencey show. Number two is A Good Doctor. On cable, the number one comedy on cable, which is also the number one comedy for millennials, was Rick and Morty, which again is a sort of sciencey show, but doesn't have anything to do with science. So I think what we can do is we can reach those same people, but also give them good content. And when I say this, I'm not talking about dumbing anything down so that's, people who aren't smart can understand things. I'm talking about platforms, formats, styles that are accessible, but just as valid in terms of content. So there are some good examples, I should say, but as far as I can tell, they aren't yet based on the social science. So there's a great example in the Science and Entertainment Exchange, who has Marvel as a high-profile relationship. They're responsible for getting a scientist into those writers' rooms and to advise the directors. I've also been talking to Hollywood science advisors, but they're kind of on their own. They're not really driven by by research. And then you'll have socially aware showrunners like the Norman Lears. And I haven't really found one yet for science, but there are some people who are pretty close, like Black Mirror, Orphan Black are maybe the closest we have. Rick and Morty is run by comedians, not by scientists, if anyone wasn't sure about that. So the outcomes I'm looking for is I want to see if we can actually engineer positive outcomes and not leave it to chance, which is kind of what it feels like to me now. And I definitely don't want to miss any opportunities that are especially easy. So I'm making media now, but I figured out a few things already, and I can summarize them in the couple of minutes I have left. And a big primary thing for me is that this thing I'm calling fact-splaining doesn't work. So in the same way that we have a default idea about what a scientist looks like, there's also a myth around how science is best communicated through media. In the 1980s, social scientists introduced this idea of the information deficit, which is, if you haven't heard this, is if people with information, like scientists, let's say, were able to provide information to the sticks, change their. And in fact, if I was to drop, any kind of fact about climate change, it would only confirm whatever view you already had. And that's the heart of fact-splaining. And it's the default mode of communication that we can do away with. Another is that images matter. So we're at a time when 81% of Americans can't name a living scientist. But if you think of a fictional scientist, it's probably a little easier, whether it's Rick Sanchez or Sheldon Cooper or Walter White or MacGyver, whoever it is. And when you thought of that, you probably thought of a white guy in a lab coat, which also just points to the importance of images in media. And you can think of this as memes, which is kind of the modern parlance for it, but social scientists would call this cultivation theory, which is maybe a term you've heard or not. So even if you're enlightened, you probably are still imagining that scientist as white, male, wearing a lab coat, crazy hair, maybe goggles, and it's probably from television. So I see this as an opportunity. And there are great examples of positive role models on television as well. So a great example is Dana Scully from The X-Files. She was essentially the first realistic portrayal of a scientist on television, and as a result, she influenced a generation of women to pursue STEM. And that's been proven scientifically actually just this year. So one-offs have had success, but I'm looking to help people with the sustained efforts. That's what I'm thinking about when I think about images. And so a few other things. There are a few variables, but I found that the diversity of producers and talent is also really important. The most successful TV shows are diverse in terms of production and talent. On the digital side, among the people that I've spoken with, the most successful videos have been created by diverse producers who have the autonomy or who give it to themselves. Storytelling, okay, that's obviously storytelling, but social science tells us why that matters, because involvement with characters makes people more open to new ideas. Social scientists call this transportation. We can essentially perform inception on people when they're immersed in narrative, so that's useful to know as the storyteller. There's also an idea that we can prime people, so it's a little different than just kind of influencing people, but social science tells us that curiosity is a bigger indicator than ideology if it comes to when people want to learn or comprehend something. So there was a rudimentary study that happened a couple of years ago studying super fans of sciencey shows, and it suggested that they're not really learning anything directly from that show, but they're learning confidence so that they could learn things on their own, and that's a great thing. Humor is another one. Humor has the ability to disrupt people's preconceptions. So all these things together are pointing in the direction of television: visuals, characters, stories, emotions. And those are all positive things, thinking about how to reach new audiences through entertainment, but still with good content. And there's one other aspect of the distribution platform. So distribution platforms really matter. As much as we have a conversation about the content and style, the delivery mechanism really matters. So for example, YouTube is going to have a certain kind of audience that is different than television. The median age of Snapchat is 26 last year. The Big Bang Theory on television was 56. So it's not inherently bad or good, but the content just needs to match that platform. And I have heard a lot of frustrations from producers about being locked into a platform that doesn't align with their audience. So that's something definitely to think about, that I'm thinking about at the earliest stage. I want things to be accessible, which is why I'm going to social platforms with everything I'm doing. So I don't want to say that it's early, but it's early. I'm running a studio that I'm just going to share a link into the chat with you in a moment. To test out these ideas, and everything will be shared. So look out for video reports in December and some other work in progress guidelines for producers. So I'll stop there, but thanks again to Wgbh, Rita Allen Foundation for supporting this, and I'll look forward to questions if you have them.
Thank you. This was great, and I wish we could spend all of our time just digging into this research, and I wish we could all be at Smash next week. Just a note to the audience: if you have a question for anyone who's spoken or anyone who's going to speak, you can see there's a little box that says Q&A. It's next to, on the, I think it's on the top left of your screen. If you open that box, you can type a question in there, and we'll be monitoring them and we'll surface them at the right time. So don't hesitate to do that. We're now going to shift the conversation a little, and I'm going to introduce Linda Harrar, and she's going to give us an overview of WGH's Innovation Idea Lab, which is another model, another unique model of communicating science to a wide range of audiences. So Linda's a senior program manager for WGH's Green Media Discretionary project, and she was formerly a Nova producer and has written and directed 24 hour-long documentaries in 35 countries around the world. So she probably knows a thing or two about how to make a successful doc. But she now curates WGBH's annual Innovation Idea Lab. So we can't wait to hear from her on that. So Linda?
Hi, and thanks. I'm delighted to have the chance to introduce you to our WGBH Green Media Innovation Idea Lab, which has been generously supported by the Candida Fund. The Idea Lab is an annual day-long festival of ideas designed to bring thoughtful leaders, activists, experts, artists, designers into WGBH with the main goal of planning new programming ideas for public media. John Bredar has said it's a day for getting drunk on ideas, which we love that description. We have our 8th Idea Lab coming up on Tuesday, October 30th, the day before Halloween. We invite you all to consider attending. It is an invitation-only event, and it's a day for our editorial staffs from all our signature programs, the Nova Science Series, Frontline Public Affairs, American Experience History Series, and on radio, PRI's The World and Innovation Hub. We also invite independent producers and researchers, and we challenge our speakers to bring us a new idea for reporting. You can find the agenda on the link we provided, and I promise it's a pitch-free zone for funders who wish to attend. We always have a good attendance from funders, so we're happy when they come and they can informally meet the various people who head up our units and some independents as well, and then the speakers. This year, our theme is the change makers, with sessions on saving nature, saving ourselves, the future of work, and designing greener, more equitable communities. I would say that social and environmental justice are always key issues that underline all of our Idea Labs. And this year we have our Saving Nature writer-activist Bill McKibben and tribal attorney Tara Huska. For the future of work, we'll have economist Byron Auguste and Florida farm workers leader and fighter for human rights Greg Asped. And for the session on designing greener and more equitable communities, we have architects Damon Rich, Michael Murphy, and urban planner Carolyn Crockett. who's from Boston here and has just been working with the city of Boston on resilience. I would say that the Idea Lab supercharges a discretionary grant from the Candida Fund for green media reporting across multiple series. Typically, it has helped us to create a Nova Science show, a frontline public affairs program, and a history program, along with reporting desks on green media for our radio series, PRI's The World, and Innovation Hub. It's a way for our top editorial leaders to hear new ideas, and it gives them confidence to take risks and discover new talent. Sometimes people who are lesser known get elevated to a more national or even international platform. People like Waleed Abdalati, who's a terrific communicator of science. Do we still have Waleed? Or I have a clip of Waleed talking on Nova's Decoding the Weather Machine.
Yeah, and that's my fault. We were going to have Waleed speak first, but Linda is doing a wonderful job, and we're going to hear from Waleed after Linda. So, Linda, you know, I think it's a perfect example as a clip of someone who's been an integral part and indicative of this Ideas Lab program.
Okay. Well, Waleed was chief scientist at NASA for some years. He's now at the University of Colorado, and someone else will give his exact bio, but he has a very important thing coming up this weekend, which is the launch of the NASA satellite, which he helped to plant the seeds for when he was at NASA. But here's a clip from NOVA's Decoding the Weather Machine, where Waleed will speak about the Greenland ice sheet and an expedition there.
The Jakobshavn ice stream is pretty much the fastest glacier in the world, and it drains huge amounts of ice from the Greenland ice sheet.
And the draining of ice from Greenland appears to be accelerating.
It's almost like uncorking a bottle of wine, right? There's all this pressure of ice wanting to flow to the sea, and as you remove that resistance in the front, that ice will accelerate.
Back on the glacier, Brian has been working quickly to install instruments that can reveal how the ice is moving behind the cavity wall. For glaciers in contact with the ocean, warmer air causes some of the loss of ice. But the real trigger for intense calving is warmer water coming underneath the glacier and destabilizing it. David says that changing winds and currents are bringing that warmer water up from the Gulf Stream, increasing the loss of ice.
People understand that half the ice loss occurs through calving, the fracturing of ice.
Its calving is a concern because ice melts slowly, but it fractures in an instant.
The fracture and breakup of the glacier could actually dominate everything. If that's the case, then the retreat of glaciers could be much faster than previously thought.
And the reason we care is there's about 23 feet of sea level equivalent locked up in the Greenland ice sheet. If it were all to disappear, oceans would go up 23 feet. Well, that's not going to happen, but, in the near future. But it is shrinking. It is losing ice to the oceans, and oceans are rising as a result.
About a third of the world's population lives within 60 miles of the coast. What's not clear is how long that process will take.
The big question is how fast. Does it take us 500 years to get there? Well, that's one thing. Or does it take us 100 years to get there? That's 3 feet in a decade. That's a lot.
So you can see, Kaitlin? Okay. Waleed's a master storyteller, and he's been a speaker twice for our Innovation Idea Labs, which help us to break out of our silos and vary our reporters from across all our units. meet each other and discover common interests, and sometimes work together on companion reporting. So we hope you'll come. It's a day to wrestle with difficult problems, but I can almost guarantee you will leave feeling inspired by powerful thought leaders and doers. So click on the link if you'd like to join us and let us know. Thanks.
Now I get to introduce, although you've got a pretty great introduction already from Linda, Waleed Abdalati, who's currently director of the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences, CIRES, a joint institute of NOAA and the University of Colorado Boulder. And he's also a professor in CU Boulder's Geography Department. His research focuses on the use of satellites and aircraft to understand how Earth's glaciers, ice sheets, and sea ice are changing and the implications of those changes for the Earth system. We should also, a previous note from the biography, that he served as NASA chief scientist from January 2011 to December 2012. Waleed, there's so much I want to ask you and so much I want you to talk about with your research and implications and how we are or aren't telling the story well to our audiences and what you think should be funded or not. But we're here to talk about Idea Lab and really how that has been a place for you to collaborate with producers and other scientists, and wondering if you can give some of that perspective.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity. And I noticed in that clip, I think I was wearing the same shirt I have on now, which I may feed into another stereotype about scientists. We only wear one shirt. I have more, I assure you. So I study changes in our environment, and in my capacity as NASA chief scientist and now running a 900-person environmental research institute, I've really had a lot of opportunity to speak to a wide range of audiences, from White House leaders to members of Congress to kindergartners to church groups and retirement communities, the full spectrum. And I have to say, I want to point to something that Adnaan said about, you can't just dump information on people and expect them to be enlightened just as you are because you've studied it for so long. A lot of times the perception is, here's this guy who thinks he's smarter than I am talking down to me, and it just doesn't resonate. And so I've had my own experiences, and I have my own sense of what works and doesn't. And what works in my communications is simply connecting with people. And you can connect with people by the sincerity in your voice, which I hope comes across in clips like what you just saw. You can connect with people with imagery. You can connect with people by framing these complex concepts in ways that matter to them. And so my experience with Idea Lab was wonderful because it gave me the opportunity to do just that. Other things I've done have been a couple of television shows on Nova, a 4-part documentary on citizen science on PBS that was funded by the National Science Foundation. But the key point in all of that, and what I experienced directly in Idea Lab, is the opportunity to not simply reach people, but resonate with people. You want to convey ideas in ways that resonate, that trigger thoughts that say something like, hey, I get that, and I see why that matters, and in fact, that matters to me. Tell me a little more. Again, I've experienced this one-on-one in the more with conversations with political leaders, but to be able to broadcast in a way that I think really reaches individuals in their living rooms or on their iPhones or wherever they're consuming the media is really, really critical. And the reason it's so important to me to reach people, and the reason why I appreciate these effective mechanisms, is because the work I do and the work my colleagues do matters. It matters to society. It matters to individuals. It matters from an economic perspective. If I simply talk about the changing Arctic, it's easy to get wrapped up in, well, that's something esoteric that scientists deal with that's far away, that doesn't affect me. But the reality is it affects us all. The changing Arctic has economic implications for fisheries, for resource extraction, has humanitarian and social implications as weather and climate change, as oceans rise, has strategic implications for the military. What does a lot of activity in the rapidly changing Arctic mean for our national security interests? What are the implications for our installations in coastal regions as the oceans rise? So these things affect people in ways they don't necessarily appreciate directly. And if they're simply presented with climate is changing, believe me, trust me on this, and it matters to you, let me tell you how. It's a little different than, hey, there's something important going on that I want to share with you, that I think we can both wrap our heads around and really commit ourselves to understanding. And so entities like Idea Lab, and I'm going to assume SMASH and other vehicles, allow this information to get out in a way that people can understand and relate to. It's not some remote, inaccessible effort done by a select few that's only the purview of the scientists. It's important to how we live. It's important to how our everyday lives. It's important to policy choices. It's important for the decisions we make as individuals and as a society. And I cannot say enough the value as a scientist who is committed to communicating in ways that resonate with people, the value of being able to have the opportunity to convey this information in a way that puts people in a receptive posture so conversations can be constructive and forward-looking rather than simply controversial and causing sides, if you will, to hunker down. So my experience was very positive, and the more of this stuff we can have, the better, as far as I'm concerned, speaking as a scientist.
Wonderful, thank you. And a reminder again to put your questions in if you have any specifically for Waleed or anyone else who's speaking. Next, we want to turn to get a funder perspective. So these gatherings are great, and you've heard from everyone on this call that funding is coming from foundations and is not possible without foundation funding. And so to get a funder perspective, we're now going to turn over to Diane Ives, who has worked with the Candida Fund since 2003 and currently serves as the fund advisor for People, Place, and Planet program, which I don't know what doesn't fit in People, Place, and Planet. She's also worked with the Tides Foundation, Belden Fund, Putnam Foundation, and the Enlist Fund. But I want to hear from Diane specifically about, from a funder perspective, why invest in these type of events?
Thank you, Kaitlin. And I just want to say, it is an honor to follow Waleed. I'm a fangirl ever since I first saw you at the first Idea Lab. So it's great to get to kind of that cleanup after you. So at the Candida Fund, the People, Place, and Planet program is a very broad and all-encompassing program that is primarily focused on all of the different ways that we can look at environmental issues. And since we started in 2003, we've always had kind of a media component to our environmental giving, because for us, it's not just enough to understand that there are environmental issues out there, but as everyone has been saying earlier on this call, it really is about how kind of people take up and absorb that information and then take action based on what they've learned and what they've experienced. So in 2009, we first started supporting WGBH for some very specific programming in both radio and television. And I think we did that for about 2 years. And what we realized was that we were kind of, as a funder, we were kind of finding ourselves trying to march to our own agenda and our own time frame, and also matching that up with the needs of this media maker. And it wasn't working as well as we had hoped. And so with the help of Linda, whose idea this was, we helped invest in something called the Discretionary Green Media Fund. And the idea behind it is that we would aggregate our resources that we wanted to put into media and storytelling in a way that would allow WGBH to have some agency and ownership of how to distribute those resources across different time frames and different scales for different kinds of programming. And also give flexibility and freedom for the executive producers to take risks and explore new ideas. And so the idea was to invest in those programs. And I think the piece that we felt was still missing, even though we had this kind of fund for investing in programs, was the opportunity for these executive producers to come together, to bust silos, to learn collectively. And quite honestly, as a funder, we feel really strongly about that there is an editorial firewall and we can't cross it, but we always have ideas that we would love to see kind of lobbed over the wall and see what happens on the media side of things. And so this Idea Lab is this amazing opportunity to kind of bring these ideas from outside kind of WGBH and kind of bring in new people and new ideas and new thoughts so that the executive producers, when they're all together for a day, get a chance to learn new and different things. And so for us, this has been, the Idea Lab has been this wonderful megaphone of ideas and opportunities. It's a chance to test out new talent for programming. And it's a beautiful way for a funder to feel like our investment is really being turbocharged in new and different ways. So I'm just going to stop here, but I'm just going to say if you're available on the at the end of October, it would be great for you to come to the Idea Lab. I'd love to see you all there.
Wonderful, thank you. So we do have one question populated here that's actually for Adnaan. It says, you provided us with an example of fact-splaining. Can you give us an example of what the alternative antidote looks like?
Sure. So this is, I guess, the fundamental thing that I'm dealing with right now, which is that we don't have great examples. So we have people that are doing different parts of those things really well. So I can point to my home of Nova, which is exceptional in the sense of storytelling, exceptional in the sense of being inclusive, but then doesn't do the entertainment part. Again, not that it's bad, because Nova is the most popular science documentary on television, and you know why. So I don't have great examples, and oftentimes some of the missing piece is that the framing is actually by elites, if I'm using that phrase. So, for example, I might say, oh, it could be great to make a game show. Game shows are really broad and accessible. The problem is when you have a science game show, the formats that they take become more like quiz shows, and instantly it's about what you don't know. You know, and that's because it's being framed from an elite perspective that if I just give you this information, that you'll learn the answer and you'll do something with it. So I wish I had more there. I can tell you things that are, 50% there, but I don't know examples that are 100%. If you know one that you've seen in history, I would love to hear about it. Actually, I should say also with an asterisk, if I wasn't clear about this, I'm trying to reach adults. So for kids, there is a lot of great programming. There's actually also a lot of research. When it comes to adults, we're forgotten.
Waleed, do you have an example?
There, okay. Yeah, I think I do on a one-on-one basis, but I think it's worth bringing up because it affects how we scale things. When I was chief scientist at NASA, one of the things I had to do was advocate for the Earth Sciences program and the satellite observations observing Earth from space. And there are many people with strong feelings about NASA, about climate change, that didn't think NASA should be in the business of observing the Earth and spending the money. And I, a number of times, would go to the offices of some of the most conservative senators and most conservative congressmen in the interest of having a conversation. And it would be about the value of knowing what tomorrow will bring. And with that as a starting point, instead of, hey, we're changing the planet, and if you only knew what I knew, you'd see things my way. We'd have very constructive conversations. And in particular, a lot of these were from rural districts. A lot of the congressmen and women were from rural districts, and they were hearing from their farmers the challenges associated with drought. So when I would start to go there, they'd lean in. I'd get a little bit of the tell me more. And a number of times as I was leaving the office, I'd get something to the effect of, you're not what I thought you'd be. I expected you to come in here and club me over the head with why I just don't get it. And in fact, you showed me you get the pressures I face, and you had a conversation around that, and I appreciate that. So I think Adnaan mentioned framing, and I think that's the key. Now, how that scales to a television program, that's for brighter minds than my own. But I will say, going to the place that we all care about, the value of information, the value of understanding, the value of being able to anticipate what's coming, and this was important too, be prepared for the challenges, or be prepared to capitalize on change. It's interesting when you frame change as an opportunity, because there are opportunities associated with the changing climate. You also get a different kind of response from people. So that framing is critical. And again, the scaling in the context of a television program, that's more than I can get my head around, but I think the basic principle is fundamental.
I like to think about, we want to take all of our audiences in through their door, but out ours, right? And I think that often is the secret to producing media and good storytelling. We had a comment from Kaitlin, not myself, another Kaitlin, to all of us, who said that I would argue that a lot of programming for kids is the program that is most likely to reach adults, either because it's the appropriate level, science-wise, for an adult with low science knowledge, or because they are watching with their kids. I wouldn't underestimate the power of kids' TV to influence adults. And she says that as an adult scientist without kids who really enjoy science nature programming for kids.
Yeah, so I actually want to add on to that. So, and I'm glad Kaitlin said that in the comments. So, there's an example of a show like SpongeBob SquarePants, where a quarter of the audience is adults watching without kids. The thing is, you've got this major show, this like cultural juggernaut that's made billions of dollars for Viacom, but there has been no research to say, has it converted any adults into marine science? And the thought is actually that it hasn't. So in the conversations I've had, non-scientific, people don't think it actually has. But I also want to add on, because there are some other potential examples that might be good, getting back to the original question, which is, I mentioned a couple of sci-fi shows, and they are, about as good as we get now. So the shows like Black Mirror or Orphan Black that are kind of merging science, technology, policy, ethics, that's pretty close. But the research isn't there, so I can't say if SpongeBob SquarePants is doing its job, if that is its job, or any other show. And actually, by the way, SpongeBob SquarePants, the creator, is a marine biologist, so there's something really potentially positive there.
And Adnaan, to follow up on that, is there an area of research? I know you're working on your fellowship on researching, but say, someone could wave a magic wand and give you all the resources you needed. Is there an area of research just feel like this information we know how to unpack this?
Well, I think what we need to do is look at the kind of corpus of shows and say, did they have an impact? So that one study was actually funded by 21st Century Fox to look into the Scully effect with the Gina Davis Institute and one other organization whose name I've forgotten. So that research, the shows are there and they've had an impact. We just don't know what that impact is. So if we could do that across the board, then we can help finding more clues, which I'm just pulling from literature and social science to help understand what could work. I may be wrong. I may be completely wrong with my hypothesis, but no one has tested it. So
that's how science works, right? Says the non-scientist. Yeah. Wonderful. Any other questions coming in? We have a question that I'm hoping either Diane or Linda can answer about the Discretionary Green Media Fund. Is there any information you can share on that? I don't know if you ladies have a link that you can throw into the webinar chat, or if you want to expand on how the fund works at all.
I can jump in just real quick and just. I don't know if there's a link that would be easy to give, but when I saw the question, I just jotted down in my own head some of the opportunities that we've been able to support through the discretionary fund. So, for example, with Frontline, the War on the EPA, which I believe is up for an Emmy maybe at the beginning of October. A while back, American Experience did a show on Rachel Carson. We've been able to support the radio show The World. We helped start kind of some of the research phase of a children's online program called Plum Landing, which is all about systems thinking. We've helped support some programming and opportunities on the World Channel. And the most recent kind of Nova show called Inside the Weather Machine. So those are just some examples that come to mind for me off the top of my head that have just kind of emerged out of this discretionary fund. So Linda, I don't know if you have a different way of wanting to talk about it.
Sure, thanks. Just briefly, we've done probably 24 documentaries with the help of the Candida Fund across our different flagship units that we've mentioned, Nova, Frontline, American Experience. We also helped to start green reporting on some new entities that enabled us to take some risks with Innovation Hub and also with the World Channel, which helps to bring in international perspectives and new voices onto a digital channel, which is housed here at WGBH. And we feel that it has really given executive producers the confidence that they can move forward on programs and have some assurance rather than sometimes twisting in the wind with proposals that last 7 years. As I remember, I used to do a series called Race to Save the Planet, which took us 7 years to get it to air. And that is a very long time to try to develop an idea. So this has given us the John, you speak.
Kaitlin, can I chime in along those lines? The Candida support that's coming out of that specific fund has served as a real catalyst to programs that have also been produced out of our Studio 6 group. And I'm thinking, Linda, of H2O, the molecule that made us, which is a project in the works right now that drew inspiration from an attendee at Innovation Idea Lab, Hank Ovink. He's actually going to be appearing in this 3-part series about water. So it had a kind of a double bonus effect in that it not only supported the Idea Lab, that helped us drive our content for a series that Candida has also been behind. So for me, that is connecting the dots in a way that I think is exactly what was the intention of the funder. And, separate from that, it's enabling us to actually tell a story we wouldn't otherwise be able to tell.
It's interesting. There's so much in the zeitgeist now about risk taking and how do you push the boundaries, because that's when true innovation is going to happen. But I think that the comments that you've both made have been interesting about allowing producers to take a risk and having the confidence that your idea is supported. And I think it's very hard to take risks, whether you're a scientist or creating media, if you don't have trust and confidence and know that your idea is going to be cared for and protected, particularly if it's risky. It's a scary space. And I think that's a through line that we're all talking about. And so I wonder if any one of our panelists wants to suggest or offered up an idea of where they think we should be taking more risks, whether that's in content stories we should be creating, in things we should be funding, in science that needs to be communicated. I open that up to the group. Raise your hand if you want to take a crack at where should we be taking risks. John's like jumping.
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity. And I think two things. One is that point you made about giving confidence to, it's kind of safe harbor to maybe not necessarily a radical idea, but an important idea that maybe has been neglected. That's the kind of thing that I love about Idea Lab as well as Smash, because that environment is where you get to kind of roll out an idea, either as a media maker or a scientist, and get the kind of excitement swirling around that idea. And to address your second point, Kaitlin, we are finding that there are a lot of different stories that are at this intersection between science and society, intersection of science and society. This would be like we did a NOVA a year and a half ago on Flint. And that raises all kinds of questions about infrastructure and how not just, failing systems and things like that, but disproportionately failing systems in urban cores and how that impacts, people who are essentially at the margins. Another one is an upcoming film that Nova's doing in October on addiction. Same thing, we need to have much better understanding of what science's role is in how to kind of formulate a policy. So a lot of these topics are not necessarily thought of as science topics. And I think that what's radical about it is to kind of drag that into this, the center of conversation. And so that's what I would say in response to that.
Vince, I think you have something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here too, because of course, I think this discussion has really perfectly illustrated one of the things that we wanted to show, and that is how important it is to have a venue where you're able to translate the innovative ideas really on the edge of science and have a very short path to media that can reach a large audience, right? Because you've got the producers right there in the room. But as much as it's clear that that's happening here in the four walls of WGBH, I think it's also an important concept for philanthropy too. We're not just supporting media that is surfacing innovation, we're also looking for innovative practice too. So the fact that these events are open to our participation as well, we've found, I think I mentioned at the top of this discussion, found going to things like PopTech and the Explorers Festival and the Frank Gathering at the University of Florida. They're great places for us to find innovative ideas and then bring them into our own programming, and for grant makers to see pathways to support those activities with their grants as well.
Anyone else want to add anything to that on innovative thinking or risk taking? No, too risky. Okay, well, I think we're about out of time. I want to thank Vince, first of all, for inviting us all to participate, and thank our panelists too. I know we all have incredibly busy schedules and are working on some of the biggest challenges facing us. And so I think it's important that we can take a pause and have these discussions and hopefully inform policy and media and funding in a positive way. And hopefully we'll all see each other soon at SMASH and an Ideas Lab, and next spring, if you're interested in the Explorers Festival that Vince has so kindly alluded to that we do here in Washington with all of National Geographic's grantees, let me know, and we can work that into your calendar as well.
And thank you, Kaitlin. I think your probation period for board service has lapsed already. You're secure in your seat. We're really thrilled to be able to share you with our audience today, and you led a really masterful discussion. I will also just invite anybody who's paying attention here to catch Kaitlin's presentation at the Media Impact Forum, and I think we'll be able to pop up the link to a really lovely talk that she provided to us this past May, and along the lines of the kind of events that we're highlighting here, we also will be having our next Media Impact Forum back in Philadelphia next May, and we'll give further details of that forthcoming. But mark the calendar, at least circle May as our Media Impact Forum. And thank you all, Waleed, Linda, John, and Diane for contributing to this really interesting discussion. And, that's it for today. Thank you all.
Thank you.